In the bustling heart of the city, Officer Daniel Stone cruises through the streets with an air of superiority, feeling untouchable as he enforces the law. His routine patrol takes a sudden turn when he spots a luxury car speeding past him. Without hesitation, he pulls over the vehicle, driven by a black woman in an upscale neighborhood. His preconceived biases flare up as he approaches her with contempt, questioning her right to be there and insinuating that the car couldn't possibly belong to her. The woman, poised and composed, remains unruffled by Daniel's aggression. Little does Daniel know, she is the wife of his new boss, Captain Marcus Lee. Despite his attempts to intimidate her, she handles the situation with dignity, leaving him frustrated and unsettled. That night, as he returns home, Daniel's thoughts are haunted by the woman's calm defiance. The next day, his unease turns into a nightmare when Captain Lee summons him to his office. The captain, known for his impeccable reputation and fairness, reveals that the woman's report of the incident has reached him. As Daniel's heart races, he realizes that his actions have consequences far beyond his expectations. This encounter, driven by his prejudices, will lead to a reckoning that changes his life forever. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Officer Daniel Stone, a white police officer, is cruising through the bustling streets of a major city on his routine patrol. With an air of unshakable authority, he feels invincible, accustomed to wielding his power with impunity and seldom facing repercussions for his actions. His patrol car glides smoothly over the pavement as he surveys the cityscape, his confidence radiating with every turn of the wheel. Suddenly, his attention is captured by a sleek luxury car speeding past him, its engine purring with undeniable opulence. A wave of suspicion washes over him. The car's driver is a black woman, and the setting is an upscale neighborhood that seems to heighten Daniel's unfounded assumptions. Driven by an ingrained prejudice, he decides to pull the vehicle over. As he maneuvers his patrol car to follow, his thoughts churn with biases. His sense of superiority grows, and his belief that he is above scrutiny is now fortified. When he finally stops the luxury sedan, Daniel approaches with a swagger that signifies his intent to assert control. His demeanor is intentionally intimidating, designed to unsettle. The woman in the driver's seat, poised and composed, meets his gaze with a calmness that contrasts starkly with the hostility he exudes. Daniel demands her documents, his tone dripping with disdain. He scrutinizes her as if questioning her right to drive such a high-end vehicle. The racially charged words that tumble from his mouth are laced with condescension, aimed to belittle and humiliate. He insinuates that the car could not possibly belong to her, a thinly veiled attack rooted in his prejudiced assumptions. Despite his attempt to provoke, the woman remains collected. She responds briefly, her actions deliberate and unflustered, as she hands over her documents with an air of dignity. Unbeknownst to Daniel, this woman is the wife of his new superior, Captain Marcus Lee. Her calm demeanor belies the knowledge that this encounter will have repercussions. She does not reveal her identity, understanding that Daniel's actions will soon have consequences far beyond his immediate interaction. As the sirens of the city echo in the background, a constant reminder of Daniel's authority, he continues his patrol with the same misplaced confidence that has marked his day. The sun casts a bright glare over the city's busy streets, but for Daniel, it's merely another routine day, one that reinforces his sense of entitlement. The patrol car weaves through an upscale neighborhood characterized by its spacious streets and meticulously maintained gardens that reflect the affluence of its residents. Although Daniel does not typically patrol this area, a slow day provides him the opportunity to spend time here. He turns a corner and spots the luxury sedan again, now moving slightly over the speed limit. It's a minor infraction, but Daniel's preconceived notions spur him to follow the vehicle. As he draws closer, he observes the driver's elegant attire and refined demeanor. Despite the absence of any real issue, Daniel's prejudiced mindset leads him to escalate the situation. He activates his lights and pulls the car over, his actions driven more by bias than by any legitimate cause for concern. When the luxury sedan comes to a halt, Daniel exits his patrol car with deliberate purpose, adjusting his belt where his holster is secured. His approach is marked by a deliberate and forceful knock on the car window. The woman, unruffled, rolls down the window with a measured grace that stands in stark contrast to Daniel's aggressive stance. As she meets his piercing eyes with her serene gaze, the encounter becomes a stark reflection of the inherent prejudices that taint his sense of duty. "License and registration, please," he commands, his tone devoid of any warmth or courtesy. The woman glances at him briefly, her eyes calm yet holding a depth that unsettles Daniel in a way he's not used to. With a silent resolve, she hands over her documents. Daniel notices that her hands are steady, an unusual sight for him, who is accustomed to seeing the trembling of nervous drivers. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Daniel inquires, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinizes the documents. The woman remains composed, her voice steady and unwavering as she responds, "No, I don't. I was driving within the speed limit." Her confident demeanor is unsettling to Daniel. He is accustomed to fear, nervousness, and a submissive attitude in drivers, but this woman's calm assurance is foreign and bothersome to him. Daniel takes his time examining the documents, meticulously searching for any discrepancies or errors that could justify his authority and allow him to assert control over the situation. When he finds nothing out of the ordinary, he decides to alter his approach. "Nice car you have there," he remarks with a sardonic smile, his tone dripping with implication. "Are you sure it's yours?" The insinuation is clear in his voice and demeanor. "Yes, it's mine," the woman replies firmly, her gaze locked with his. "I purchased it with my own money." Her words are simple yet carry an unspoken challenge that Daniel is not prepared to confront. The confidence in her reply irks him, prompting him to probe further. "Is that so?" "Interesting," Daniel says, his voice taking on a mocking edge. "I wasn't aware this neighborhood was becoming a hotspot for luxury cars. Do you live around here, or are you just passing through? You seem a bit out of place to me." The woman senses the underlying hostility in his tone and responds with calm determination. "I'm heading home. I've lived in this neighborhood for 3 years." She gestures towards a street ahead. "My house is just down that way." Daniel glances in the direction she points, but there is nothing visible that would justify prolonging the stop. Yet, his unspoken frustration compels him to continue. He leans on the car, invading her personal space enough that she can detect the faint aroma of coffee on his breath. "You know," Daniel begins, his tone now laced with insinuation, "a car like this can attract attention. People like you don't usually drive around here. Maybe there's something you're not telling me." The woman's expression hardens slightly, but she maintains her composure. "People like me. And what exactly does that mean?" Her question is direct and pointed, and her unyielding stare makes it clear that she's not interested in engaging in Daniel's power play. Daniel sneers and steps back from the car, the encounter leaving a lingering tension in the air. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. "You know exactly what this means," he responds tersely, deliberately avoiding the rhetorical nature of the question. "So, where exactly do you work? Maybe I should give your employer a call and verify if your story holds any water. It wouldn't be the first time I've caught someone fabricating tales around here." The woman takes a slow, deliberate breath, visibly wrestling with the surge of irritation welling up inside her. "I'm an attorney, if that's what you're asking. I'm employed at Benson and Leon, located on Main Street." Daniel's eyes narrow as he processes the name of the firm, one of the most prestigious and well-regarded in the city. His frustration mounts as it becomes evident that she seems to have a prepared response for everything he throws at her. Nothing he says appears to have the desired impact. "An attorney, huh?" he says, his voice dripping with skepticism. "One of those who defend people who break the law. Let's see how well you fare when you're on the other side of the fence." Daniel takes a step back from the car, reaching for his radio with a practiced air of authority. He pretends to communicate with dispatch, his tone formal. "I need a background check here," he announces, though his true intent is to intimidate her and make her feel cornered. The woman crosses her arms defiantly and leans back slightly in her seat, maintaining her composure. "I've already assured you that my documents are in order. There's no justification for prolonging this stop," she states firmly, her voice calm yet resolute. "I'm more than willing to cooperate, but I will not tolerate being treated disrespectfully." Daniel's irritation grows palpable. "You're quite the bold one, aren't you? This situation might not end well for you if you don't adjust your attitude. I suggest you reconsider before things escalate further." He scrutinizes her, expecting her to back down under his pressure, but she remains unmoved, which only heightens his unspoken fury. "Can I leave now?" she asks with a sharp edge to her voice that signals her impatience and unwillingness to engage further. Daniel hesitates, taken aback by her calm and composed demeanor. For a fleeting moment, he contemplates extending the stop, but the steadfast way she looks at him compels him to reconsider. "Yes," he finally mutters, handing her back her documents with a begrudging gesture. "But keep your eyes open. We're keeping tabs on you. Don't forget who you're dealing with." She accepts her documents and, without another word, smoothly drives away, leaving Daniel standing by the curb, watching as the car fades into the distance. He remains there for a few seconds, the fading rumble of the engine mingling with his thoughts. He is left with a peculiar sense of frustration, a silent anger that he struggles to comprehend. There's something about that woman that unsettles him, though he can't quite identify what it is. As Daniel returns to his patrol car, he realizes that his heart is racing inexplicably. The stop had been routine, but the interaction with her had left him feeling oddly disturbed. He sits down in the driver's seat, closing his eyes momentarily in an attempt to dispel the unsettling sensation. Yet her words linger in his mind. "I bought it with my money." That night, Daniel gets home later than usual. Sarah is in the living room reading a book but barely looks up when he walks in. Their marriage has been distant for years, but Daniel never cared enough to try to fix it. He doesn't want to talk about his day, and Sarah doesn't ask. There is a comfortable silence between them, but this time Daniel's mind is elsewhere. He doesn't know that, at that very moment, the woman he had stopped is at home telling her husband what had happened, and that this husband, his new boss, was about to set a plan in motion that would change Daniel's life forever. The city is waking up to another day, but in Daniel Stone's mind, the previous night hasn't ended. He can't shake the memory of the calm, unflinching gaze of the woman he had pulled over the day before. Something about her has struck him deeply, a discomfort clinging to his conscience like a thorn. Arriving at the station, Daniel greets his colleagues with a nod. He maintains the same posture as always, but inside he feels a restlessness he can't explain. He sits at his desk and begins reviewing reports from the previous shift, trying to focus. However, his thoughts keep drifting back to that woman, to the way she had challenged him without a single offensive word, to how she refused to submit to his authority. His introspection is interrupted by a deep, firm voice behind him. "Stone, my office, now." It was the new boss, Captain Marcus Lee. Daniel looks up, surprised. Lee had recently taken command, and although Daniel knew little about him, he had already heard stories of his impeccable reputation and insistence on maintaining order fairly. Lee's expression was unreadable, which made Daniel's heart beat a little faster as he walked toward Lee's office. Daniel tried to imagine the reason for the summons. He couldn't think of anything specific, but the memory of the woman from the previous day unsettled him. When he entered the office, he found Lee sitting behind a large wooden desk. his eyes fixed on Daniel as if trying to read his soul. "Close the door," Lee said in a tone that left no room for argument. Daniel obeyed and stood on the other side of the desk. The silence that followed was heavy, as if each second stretched into eternity. Finally, Lee spoke, his voice calm but laden with authority. "Yesterday, you made a stop on a luxury car in Pine Hills, correct?" Daniel nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "Yes, sir. I made a routine stop," he replied, trying to sound confident. "The driver was behaving suspiciously, so I decided to check it out." "Behaving suspiciously," Lee repeated, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "And what exactly led you to believe there was something suspicious?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. He knew there was no real justification for the stop beyond his prejudice, but he couldn't admit that openly. "Well, sir, the car was slightly over the speed limit, and given the time and place, I thought it prudent to investigate," Daniel Stone said, striving to maintain a semblance of composure. Captain Marcus Lee studied Daniel with a penetrating gaze, the silence stretching between them as if Lee were weighing each word carefully. "Interesting," Lee finally said, leaning back in his chair with an air of contemplation. "Because according to the driver's report, there was no infraction. The stop was noted for a series of comments that, to be frank, do not meet the standards we uphold here." Daniel's heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. The notion of a complaint reaching Lee so swiftly was unsettling, and the gravity of the situation began to dawn on him. "Respectfully," Sir Daniel began, but Lee raised a hand, cutting him off with a gesture that brooked no interruption. "I'm not finished," the captain said, his voice maintaining a calm yet firm tone that left no room for argument. "I need to make something very clear, Stone. I will not tolerate any abuse of power within this department. I understand that the job can be grueling and that errors occur, but some boundaries must not be crossed." Daniel's anxiety surged, but he struggled to keep his voice steady. "I understand, sir. I only intended to protect the community," he said, attempting to sound earnest. Lee continued to observe him with a discerning eye, then stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. "I hope that's the case," he said, his gaze unwavering. "From now on, I'll be closely monitoring your actions. This city needs officers who genuinely serve and protect, not those who seek to intimidate and misuse their authority. I will be keeping a vigilant eye on you." The weight of Lee's words settled heavily on Daniel's shoulders. He could feel a creeping sense of paranoia and unease. He wondered just how far Lee's scrutiny would go and how it might impact his daily work. "I understand," Sir Daniel said, trying to maintain his professional demeanor. "If there's nothing else, I'll return to my duties." "Go," Lee said tersely, still facing the window. "But remember what I've said, Stone. There will not be a second chance." As Daniel left the office, Lee's stern warning echoed in his mind, amplifying his sense of being under constant surveillance. Returning to his desk, he attempted to focus on his tasks, but the tension and unease were palpable. The weight of Lee's warning was a constant reminder that his actions would be closely scrutinized from now on. In the days that followed, Daniel felt the increased scrutiny of his every move. Every stop he made was observed by a colleague, and his reports were reviewed with an intensity he had never experienced before. He felt as if he were trapped in a high-stakes game where the rules had shifted, and he was struggling to keep up. The memory of the woman he had stopped haunted him persistently. It wasn't just the incident itself, but the image of her calm, unyielding demeanor that troubled him more than he cared to admit. He found himself reflecting on how he might have exerted more control over the encounter and how he could have escalated the situation further. Yet, at the same time, he was acutely aware that any further misstep could spell his downfall. Lee wasn't just any boss. His presence alone was a constant reminder that mistakes were not an option. For Daniel, working under Lee was like navigating a minefield. Every misstep could trigger a disaster. The oppressive atmosphere in the office left him feeling on edge, as if his every action was scrutinized and every decision could lead to catastrophic consequences. At home, the situation was no better. The distance between Daniel and Sarah had grown wider than ever. Their interactions had become mechanical and devoid of warmth. Daniel felt increasingly isolated, his silence met with Sarah's obliviousness to his inner turmoil. The thought of her potentially knowing about his affair with Claire, the wife of a colleague, weighed heavily on him. The mere idea that she might be aware of his betrayal was enough to make him uneasy, though he never dared to broach the subject with her. The affair with Claire, which had once provided a semblance of escape, now felt like an additional burden on his conscience. What was supposed to be a brief respite from his troubles had morphed into another source of anxiety and guilt. The thrill of their clandestine meetings had faded, replaced by a constant dread of discovery. At the station, time seemed to drag interminably. Each day was a painstaking endurance of heightened tension. Daniel tried to maintain a facade of impeccable behavior, but the ever-present fear of being caught consumed him. He felt trapped, like a rat in a snare, with an ever-looming sense that Lee was waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought of quitting and fleeing the city began to take root in his mind, but the prospect of such a drastic move filled him with dread. The courage required to make such a decision was something he feared he lacked. As the sun dipped behind the city's skyline, casting a golden glow over the urban landscape, Daniel found no solace in the fading light. The beauty of the sunset seemed to mock him, highlighting the contrast between the world's serenity and his internal chaos. Since his conversation with Captain Marcus Lee, a heavy cloud of restlessness had settled over his life. Every step he took felt laden with caution, as though a single mistake could unravel everything he knew. But there was another gnawing worry that Daniel struggled to suppress: his ongoing affair with Claire. What had started as an escape now felt like a burdensome secret, a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. The excitement of their clandestine rendezvous had long since given way to a pervasive sense of fear and anxiety. The thought of Lee discovering the affair was a constant terror. That afternoon, after a particularly grueling shift, Daniel received a text from Claire. She wanted to meet him, as usual, at a discreet hotel on the outskirts of the city. Daniel hesitated, the risk seeming more daunting than ever. Yet, the allure of a brief respite from the relentless pressure and suspicion was too tempting. He convinced himself that he could be cautious enough to avoid any complications and decided to go. Upon arriving at the hotel, Daniel found Claire waiting for him in the room. She was perched on the edge of the bed, her face a mixture of longing and worry. "You took your time," Claire said, as Daniel closed the door behind him, her voice laced with both relief and frustration. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." Daniel forced a smile as he sat down beside her. "Things are complicated," he said, his tone weary. "I'm under close watch. We have to be more careful than ever." Claire sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I understand. I've been thinking about it a lot, but staying away from you is just too hard." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Her words, which once would have filled him with a perverse sense of satisfaction, now only served to heighten his unease. Each encounter seemed to tighten the metaphorical noose around his neck, leaving him feeling increasingly trapped. "And what about your husband?" Daniel asked, his voice betraying the guilt that was gnawing at him from within. "He doesn't have any suspicions?" Claire shook her head. "No, he's been so engrossed in his work that he barely notices I'm even here." Her laughter followed, but it was a hollow, joyless sound that did little to mask the strain beneath her words. A pang of discomfort tightened in Daniel's chest. He found himself questioning whether all this was worth the risk. Was the gamble he was taking truly justified? "We need to be smarter about this," he said, struggling to project authority. "If anyone finds out, it will not only ruin my career but also destroy everything we've worked for. I can't let that happen." Claire looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, Daniel saw something new, a flicker of vulnerability that hadn't been there before. It unsettled him. "I don't want to be a burden to you," Daniel, Claire said quietly. "But I also don't want to lose you." Daniel tried to offer reassurance, though he was more focused on bolstering his sense of control than on comforting her. "We'll keep going, but we have to be more cautious," he said, his voice firm yet laced with uncertainty. At that moment, he clung to the belief that he could manage the situation, that he could continue without drawing any unwanted attention. What he didn't realize was that the net was already beginning to close in, with Lee's relentless pursuit tightening its grip. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the station to a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The usual bustle was replaced by an almost tangible tension. He noticed his colleagues casting furtive glances in his direction, their expressions sharp and expectant, as if anticipating some imminent development. As he walked down the hallway, whispers fluttered through the air, their contents just out of reach, adding to his growing sense of foreboding. Upon reaching his desk, Daniel discovered a plain white envelope lying inconspicuously atop his paperwork. It was devoid of any markings, offering no clue as to its sender. A wave of unease washed over him as he picked it up, his fingers trembling. With a sense of dread tightening around him, he opened the envelope to reveal a single photograph inside. His heart nearly ceased its rhythm as he recognized the image, a photo of him and Claire, clearly taken as they were entering a hotel. The world around him seemed to blur, and for a moment, he questioned the reality of the situation. Someone knew. Someone had uncovered their secret. Daniel scanned the room, his eyes darting around in a desperate search for the person who might have left the photo. But his colleagues appeared oblivious, engrossed in their tasks and conversations. Panic surged within him as he quickly returned the photograph to the envelope and shoved it into his desk drawer, his mind racing with anxiety. Throughout the rest of the day, Daniel struggled to focus on his duties. His thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind, consumed by the mystery of who could have taken the photo and what their intentions might be. Was it a warning, a veiled threat, or perhaps a trap meticulously set by Lee? The uncertainty gnawed at him, amplifying his sense of impending doom. As the hours ticked by, Daniel felt an increasing sense of suffocation, as though the walls of his world were closing in on him. The pressure of the situation weighed heavily on him, and he was plagued with a growing sense of dread. He knew he had to act, but his options seemed grim and fraught with peril. Should he confront Captain Lee directly and risk further inciting his ire? Should he deny everything and hope for the best, or was fleeing the only viable escape? In the end, Daniel chose to maintain a facade of calm, opting to act as though nothing had happened. He hoped that by downplaying the situation, the interest of those behind the incriminating photo might wane. Yet, beneath this veneer of cool detachment, Daniel was acutely aware that he had lost control of the situation. The knowledge gnawed at him that it was only a matter of time before the full weight of his predicament came crashing down. When Captain Lee's voice cut through the thick tension in the room, Daniel felt a dry, uncomfortable lump in his throat. Lee's voice, though low, carried an unyielding authority that brooked no dissent. "I told you there wouldn't be a second chance," Lee began, his tone measured but laced with an unmistakable edge. "I expected you to take that seriously." Daniel tried to respond, but no words emerged. He felt like a cornered animal, his instincts screaming for escape, yet knowing there was no viable route. Lee picked up the photo, holding it aloft as if scrutinizing it for the first time, though Daniel knew better. The captain had seen it before, and its presence now only served to underscore the gravity of the situation. "I had a sense something was off about you," Lee continued, his gaze unrelenting. "Your behavior at work had already been problematic, but this is beyond what I can overlook." "Captain, I can explain," Daniel began, but Lee cut him off sharply, his voice rising with barely restrained frustration. "Explain what exactly? Do you intend to justify your betrayal of a colleague, or your involvement in an affair that jeopardizes your entire career and the trust of your partners?" Lee's voice grew louder with each accusation, his disdain palpable. "I have no interest in hearing excuses. It was a mistake," Daniel stammered, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "It won't happen again, I swear." Lee stepped closer, his presence imposing. Daniel instinctively took a step back, feeling a deep-seated anxiety, a mistake that could dismantle not just your life, but also the lives of those around you. "This isn't solely about you, Stone. I hope you understand that." Lee's voice was cold, but there was an undertone of something more menacing, a flicker of a deeper motive that unsettled Daniel further. "I could destroy you right now," Lee said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I could obliterate your career, your life, and everything you've worked for. But I'm not going to do that. Not yet." Daniel's eyes widened, confusion and fear mixing in a chaotic swirl. He struggled to grasp the full implications of Lee's words. "I'm going to give you a choice," Stone Lee continued, his tone now carrying a hint of finality. "You will redeem yourself. You'll follow my instructions precisely, when and how I say. If you manage to navigate this properly, you might salvage some semblance of dignity." Daniel's body tensed with a mixture of relief and terror. "Yes, sir. I'll do whatever it takes." Lee's expression remained stern, but there was a subtle shift, a slight softening, as if he had achieved his objective. "Good. Now get out of my office. Remember, I'm offering you a chance that many wouldn't. Don't squander it." As Daniel left the office, the weight of his predicament settled heavily on his shoulders. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but the clarity of his predicament was undeniable. The choice before him was stark, and the consequences of failure loomed large. Daniel left the office with the sensation of having narrowly escaped a perilous trap, but he was acutely aware that he was, in fact, more ensnared than ever before. The days that followed his tense conversation in Captain Marcus Lee's office stretched interminably, each moment dragging with a relentless weight. The pressure on Daniel Stone was mounting, a constant and oppressive force that seemed to suffocate him from within. Although he had vowed to comply with Lee's demands, the pervasive fear that his life could unravel at any given moment kept him teetering on the brink of despair. The silence he had once cherished in the sanctuary of his home now felt like an oppressive shroud, closing in around him and amplifying his anxiety. Even the meetings with Claire, which had previously offered a brief respite from his torment, were now marred by the persistent dread of being discovered. The joy and solace he had once derived from these encounters were overshadowed by the ever-present terror of exposure. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. At the police station, Daniel's vigilance was constant. He was acutely aware that Lee's watchful eyes were scrutinizing his every move. The sensation of being under a microscope, with Lee as the ever-present observer, rendered him a mere puppet in a grim theater, with the captain orchestrating his every action. Daniel struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy in his routine, but every action and every decision was clouded by the omnipresent threat that his carefully constructed world could collapse in an instant. A week after their last conversation, Lee summoned Daniel to his office once more. This time, the captain's demeanor was markedly more serious, suggesting he had decided on significant consequences. The gravity of the situation was palpable. Stone Lee began abruptly, his voice devoid of preamble. I have a mission for you. This assignment will determine whether you truly deserve the second chance I'm offering." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The word mission sent a jolt of apprehension through him. He fought to keep his composure, but the gnawing fear that Lee might be setting him up for failure was impossible to ignore. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Daniel inquired, his voice betraying a hint of his inner turmoil. Lee fixed him with a piercing gaze, as if weighing his response carefully. "There's an ongoing operation. We're investigating a sophisticated drug trafficking network with covert connections within the police force. I need you to go undercover and identify the individuals involved. Your objective is straightforward. Earn their trust and gather the evidence necessary to secure a conviction." The enormity of the task settled over Daniel like a heavy blanket, its implications both daunting and fraught with peril. Daniel sat in silence, the gravity of Lee's words sinking in. A dangerous mission lay ahead, one that would jeopardize his very life. He had no choice but to accept. Lee understood this, and so did Daniel. It was clear that this mission was not just about the assignment itself, but also about maintaining control over him. "Understood, Sir," Daniel responded firmly, without a trace of hesitation. He was acutely aware that any sign of reluctance or hesitation could have dire consequences, not just for his career, but for his survival. Lee continued, outlining the next steps. "You'll be working with narcotics agent Tom Carter. He's already embedded within the group and will introduce you as a recruit. This operation is your chance to demonstrate that you're still trustworthy." Tom Carter, a name Daniel recognized but had never worked with directly, was known for his tough but fair reputation. Daniel had seen him around but lacked first-hand experience of his working style. What Daniel was unaware of was that Carter had been briefed about Daniel's situation and had been instructed by Lee to keep a vigilant eye on him throughout the mission. Later that evening, Daniel met Carter at a nondescript bar situated in a seedy part of town, frequented by various contacts of the drug network. The bar was dimly lit, adding to the clandestine atmosphere. Carter, a man known for his solitary nature and minimalistic communication, approached Daniel without any preamble. He took a seat beside him, his demeanor indifferent and businesslike. "So, you're the recruit," Carter remarked, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance, avoiding direct eye contact. "Yeah, seems like it," Daniel responded, striving to match Carter's casual tone, though his nerves were on edge. Carter scrutinized him with a sidelong glance as if evaluating his composure and sincerity. "Lee trusts you, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But don't get any ideas that we're going to be chummy. This is a high-stakes game, and it's every man for himself. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded, the seriousness of the situation settling in. "Understood. I'm here to assist however needed." Carter took a slow drink from his beer before laying out the plan. "We're meeting with the group tomorrow night. When we do, you're going to keep a low profile and speak only when necessary. I'll introduce you as someone looking to get into the business. That's your role, nothing more, nothing less." As the day of the mission approached, Daniel found it nearly impossible to concentrate on his regular duties. His thoughts were consumed by the impending operation. A mix of fear and adrenaline churned within him, creating a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. The stakes were high. Failure was not an option. The risk involved was not only about jeopardizing his career but potentially his very life. When night fell, Daniel met Carter at an abandoned site on the city's outskirts. The location was grim and desolate, with darkness enveloping the area, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Carter was accompanied by two men Daniel had never seen before. It was clear from their demeanor and attire that they were seasoned figures in the criminal underworld. One of them, a formidable man with a noticeable scar running down his face, scrutinized Daniel with an air of distrust. Daniel braced himself, knowing that every action and reaction would be under scrutiny. This was his chance to prove his worth and survive the treacherous world he was about to step into. "Is this the guy?" the man asked, his tone carrying a hint of skepticism as he crossed his arms and scrutinized Daniel with a piercing gaze. Carter nodded in response. "Yes, this is Stone. He's reliable," he assured, his voice steady but betraying a trace of apprehension. The man's expression remained skeptical, his eyes narrowing as he evaluated Daniel with evident distrust. Despite Carter's endorsement, he seemed far from convinced. "We'll see what he can do," he said, his tone implying that Daniel had yet to prove himself. "The next shipment is due to arrive tomorrow, and we need someone who can ensure everything goes smoothly." His gaze turned icy as he fixed his stare on Daniel. "Do you think you're up to the task?" Daniel stood his ground, feeling the weight of the man's scrutiny but refusing to show any sign of wavering. "Yeah, I can handle it," he responded, his voice carrying a note of unwavering confidence. The man's lips curled into a thin smile that failed to reach his eyes, conveying no warmth or reassurance. "Good. We'll see how you perform." The night seemed to dissolve into a haze of activity. Daniel diligently followed Carter's instructions, meticulously observing every detail, every interaction, absorbing all the information he could gather. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. Any mistake could have dire consequences. He understood that earning these men's trust was crucial for the success of his mission, assigned to him by Lee. As the operation unfolded, Daniel's sense of foreboding deepened. The trafficking network was far more sophisticated and formidable than he had initially anticipated. Beyond the visible law enforcement presence, there were external forces at play, shadowy figures whose involvement added layers of complexity to an already perilous situation. He soon found himself ensnared in a tangled web of deceit and treachery, where every decision held life or death implications. Each encounter with the traffickers was fraught with tension, a test of his nerves and composure. Maintaining his facade was crucial, but the constant fear of exposure and Carter's incessant vigilance kept him in a state of heightened alertness. He was walking a razor-thin line between fulfilling his mission and safeguarding his own life. During one particularly tense meeting, the man with the scar approached Daniel, his demeanor more distrustful than ever. "You know, Stone," he began in a low, almost conspiratorial whisper, "I don't trust you. There's something about you that just doesn't sit right with me." Daniel's heart pounded, but he managed to keep his expression neutral and his voice steady. "I'm here to get the job done," he replied, striving to project confidence despite the rising tension. The man stared at him for a long, unnerving moment before finally stepping back. "I hope so," he said quietly, his voice laced with suspicion, before turning his attention back to Carter, leaving Daniel to grapple with the mounting pressure of his precarious situation. Daniel was acutely aware of the perilous position he was in. At any given moment, the intricate web of deception he had carefully spun could unravel, exposing him to dire consequences. There was no certainty that Lee, his tenuous ally, would come to his rescue. After all, Daniel was here not merely as a participant, but as a test case, an individual charged with demonstrating his worth under the harshest of conditions. Failure was not an option he could afford. As Daniel grappled with the immense pressure of his mission, the personal life he had left behind was unraveling at an alarming rate. Sarah, his wife, was growing increasingly distant with each passing day. Their marriage, already hanging by the thinnest of threads, was now on the brink of disintegration. Daniel understood all too well that he could no longer count on Sarah for support. Yet the profound loneliness and emotional isolation he felt made him even more vulnerable to the trials he was facing. The noose of danger was tightening around him, and Daniel sensed that time was running out. He was acutely aware that he needed to find a way to extricate himself from this perilous situation and complete the mission without losing himself in the process. However, as each day passed, the prospect of achieving this seemed increasingly remote. Deep within, Daniel harbored a haunting realization. Even if he survived the mission, the person he emerged as would be irrevocably changed. The boundaries between right and wrong, justice and survival, were becoming ever more blurred. He questioned how much longer he could endure this internal and external turmoil before succumbing to the strain. By dawn, Daniel Stone was a shadow of his former self, worn down by relentless mental and physical exhaustion. The burden of the mission, compounded by sleepless nights and the ever-present anxiety of potential exposure, seemed to weigh heavily upon him. He knew he was approaching his breaking point, yet the necessity of continuing was inescapable. The mission Lee had entrusted him with was not just a test of his capabilities, but a matter of sheer survival. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. That morning, as he steeled himself for yet another tense meeting with the trafficking network, Daniel received an urgent message from Lee. "We need to talk." Now, the terse message left no room for misinterpretation. A shiver of apprehension coursed through Daniel. Lee's direct summons was an unusual and ominous sign, indicating that a significant and troubling development had occurred. Daniel made his way to the station, his heart racing with a mix of dread and anticipation. Upon arriving and entering Lee's office, he found the captain standing rigidly by the window, the air thick with tension. Captain Daniel began, but Lee cut him off with a raised hand, signaling him to silence. "We have a problem," Lee said, his back still turned. "The man with the scar, Jake, he doesn't trust you, and frankly, I can't say I blame him." A chill swept through Daniel as he heard Jake's name. He had been aware of Jake's suspicions, but the confirmation from Lee underscored the severity of the situation. "Jake is pushing hard," Lee continued, finally pivoting to face Daniel. "He wants you to prove your loyalty in ways that we cannot allow. They're planning a major operation tonight, and Jake is insisting that you be involved. If you refuse, the consequences will be dire. However, if you agree, you'll not only compromise your position but also endanger everyone involved." The gravity of Lee's words weighed heavily on Daniel. The stakes of his precarious situation now laid bare in stark, unsettling terms. Daniel felt as though the very ground had been yanked out from beneath him. He struggled to keep his voice steady as he asked, "And what do you suggest I do?" Lee stepped closer, his gaze unyielding and as hard as granite. "We need a way out, Stone. You're going to be involved in the job, but we'll be prepared to intervene. This operation will ensure that everyone involved is put into custody. But for it to work, you need to play your part flawlessly." The notion of participating in an actual heist, even under the watchful eye of the police, made Daniel's stomach churn with anxiety. The stakes were high. Any misstep could prove fatal, not just for him, but for the entire operation. Yet, despite the danger, this was his solitary chance to salvage some semblance of dignity. "Understood," Daniel responded with resolve. "I'll do what needs to be done." Lee's nod was curt, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Stone, I'm aware you've made many mistakes, but this is your opportunity for redemption. If you succeed, you'll salvage your career. If you fail, well, you're well aware of the consequences." As Daniel left the office, he felt the crushing weight of the situation settle heavily upon his shoulders. The passage of time seemed to accelerate, drawing him inexorably into a vortex of impending doom. Night descended with an almost oppressive finality, and he prepared himself for what would be the most critical juncture of his life. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, its desolate, decaying structure casting long, ominous shadows. The air was charged with palpable tension as Daniel arrived. Jake, the man with the scar who commanded the operation, fixed his steely gaze on Daniel the moment he stepped through the door. "Tonight," Jake said with a chilling smile, "we'll see what you're made of." He handed Daniel a gun, and proceeded to brief him on the plan. The heist involved breaching a rival cartel's drug depot to steal a substantial cache of cocaine. The operation was fraught with danger, both financially lucrative and deadly if executed poorly. Daniel's mind raced as he absorbed the details. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest, but he steeled himself. The coming hours would test every ounce of his resolve and resourcefulness. The only certainty he had was that he had to see this through to the end, no matter the personal cost. Carter was present, and the look in his eyes conveyed the unspoken truth they were entering perilous territory. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Daniel understood that any misstep could be fatal. As they prepared for the operation, Daniel felt the cold, heavy weight of the gun in his hand. It was a stark reminder of the seriousness of the night's events. He knew that by the end of the evening his life would be irrevocably altered, one way or another. Upon arrival at the depot, the quiet of the night contrasted sharply with the palpable tension in the air. Daniel followed the instructions meticulously, striving to maintain an outward calm despite the mounting pressure. Jake led the group, his movements precise and deliberate. The entire operation was unfolding according to plan, or so it seemed. Without warning, the silence was shattered by a distant noise, a sound that caused everyone to halt abruptly. Daniel's instincts told him immediately the police were closing in. Lee had not only kept his promise, but had also ensured that the operation was under surveillance. Before Daniel could process this new threat, Jake turned towards him, his gaze filled with suspicion. "Did you betray us?" Jake's voice cut through the tension like a knife, direct and accusatory. In that instant, Daniel felt the precariousness of his situation. His life hung in the balance. Desperate to defuse the escalating situation, Daniel raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "No, this isn't part of the plan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady and convincing. But Jake's mistrust was evident. He raised his gun, aiming it straight at Daniel. The scene erupted into chaos within moments. Carter, who had been standing close by, sprang into action with remarkable speed. In a blur, he tackled Jake, preventing him from firing. The sound of gunfire erupted in the confined space of the depot, creating a cacophony of noise and confusion. Lee's team burst onto the scene, their shouts and commands cutting through the din as they took control of the situation. Daniel hit the ground, his heart racing furiously, adrenaline surging through every nerve. As the gunfire subsided and a tense silence fell over the depot, Lee arrived, his eyes scanning the area with a steely gaze. Jake lay on the floor, handcuffed and unconscious, while the other gang members were being apprehended and taken into custody. Carter approached Daniel, extending a hand to help him up. "You okay?" His tone was a mix of concern and relief, reflecting the intensity of the moment. Daniel nodded, still in a daze from the events that had unfolded so quickly. Lee walked over to him, his expression inscrutable. "You did it," he said, the words carrying a weight of unspoken acknowledgement. "It's over." The operation had been completed, but the night's events left Daniel with a profound sense of disorientation. The reality of what had just transpired settled in as he stood amidst the aftermath, the impact of his actions sinking in. But Daniel knew deep down that the ordeal wasn't truly over. Though the mission was completed, the scars etched from that harrowing night would linger within him indefinitely. He surveyed the scene, witnessing the men being led away in handcuffs, and felt a profound emptiness begin to swell inside him. He had survived, yes, but the cost was steep, and the weight of what he had endured was beginning to settle heavily on his shoulders. Back at the station, Lee summoned Daniel to his office one final time. The room was cloaked in a somber, dim light that seemed to mirror the exhaustion etched into the captain's face. The fatigue was palpable, a testament to the toll the recent events had taken on him. "You did what had to be done," Stone Lee said, his voice carrying the weariness of his long nights and burdens. "Because of your actions, I'm giving you another chance." Daniel remained silent for a moment, grappling with the mixed emotions swirling within him. He had managed to salvage his career, but the sense of disillusionment and the internal fracture he felt made it difficult to embrace the moment fully. He could not shake the haunting sense that a part of him had irrevocably shattered during that night. "Thank you, Captain," he finally murmured, his voice sounding foreign to him, as though it had been stripped of its usual confidence. Lee's gaze hardened, his eyes reflecting the gravity of his next words. "But remember this is your last chance. I won't be able to save you again. Make it count." Daniel nodded solemnly, the weight of Lee's words sinking in as a stark, irrevocable truth. He exited Lee's office with a heavy heart, his head bowed in resignation. He felt a fleeting sense of relief, mixed with a profound emptiness. The world he had known had irrevocably shifted, and the normalcy he had once taken for granted was now a distant memory. Upon arriving home, Sarah was waiting for him, her face a mask of unreadable emotions. The tension between them was palpable, and Daniel knew he had to confront his past, make peace with his choices, and most importantly, reconcile with himself. At that moment, all he longed for was a brief respite, a sliver of tranquility before the full repercussions of his actions made themselves known once more. As the door closed behind him, the sound resonated through the house, underscoring the solitude of his return. Daniel realized that the true challenge was just beginning. The internal struggle, the one that would occupy his thoughts and heart every day from now on, would prove to be the most grueling battle of all. So there you have it, folks. A story of prejudice, unexpected consequences, and the power of empathy. What have you learned from this tale? In the comments below, share one thing you've learned from this story that you'll apply to your own life. Let's create a community of understanding and respect together. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by leaving a comment, liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. We'll continue to bring you thought-provoking stories and discussions.